Thank you, Susan. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to all who are listening there in your little squares that we can't see, but thank you for being there from Vermont to California. As a boy, he ate tea cakes at an enameled table at his grandmother, Mama Mary's house, and she counted birds on the power lines. When he was 5, he would compose lyrics in his head and sing along with the radio in Bogalusa, Louisiana. As a child, he had little literature to choose from, so he read encyclopedias that his mama bought. And he, a little later, read and reread James Baldwin's Nobody Knows My Name. And he borrowed that novel, by the way, from the church library because, and we forget that too quickly, the local library, the local public library there in Bogalusa did not admit African Americans. In church, he listened with fascination to the stories and to the power of words when the preacher read from the King James Bible. He read Yeats' poems to his cousin Beatrice when he was 15. And then when he came of age, he was sent to Vietnam, told to clutch an M16, but he much preferred clutching Donald Annell's anthology, The New American Poetry, 1945-1960. It took him 14 years to write about that war in 2 poetry collections. He wrote with deep emotion and compassion about those he fought. The Vietnamese peasants reminded him of sharecroppers in Louisiana. He began writing poetry when he was 26. He won the Pulitzer in 1994 for Neon Vernacular. He's a poet, a playwright, an essayist, a professor, a teacher, a mentor, a librettist, and a chancellor at the Academy of American Poets. And he won many, many prizes. But if you were at Kwame Dawes' talk before this, you saw that it's not prizes that are important. It's coming back to the page over and over and refining our craft. Ladies and gentlemen, Yusef Komunyakaa. Hello, Yusef.
To you.
I'm delighted to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for answering the questions. Growing up in Bogalusa, Louisiana, you were raised there during the beginning, right, of the civil rights movement. What was your young boy's life like there? Were you aware of what was going on?
It was interesting because I had really used the terrain as a place to lose myself.
Huh.
And when I say lose myself, it was really a process of discovery. Not that I was talking directly to myself, but the fact that there was a kind of communication. I knew that there was trouble in that landscape as well. But lately I've been thinking about the fact that I was never afraid of the night. It's almost scary. It's almost scary to remember that. One reason is because I thought I knew more about the terrain than anyone else. I had that in my feeling. So there was a kind of protection, perhaps even in naivety.
Right. But to know the terrain so well at night, you must have observed it very intensely during daytime, right?
Yes, I wasn't afraid of it.
Right, right.
I wasn't afraid of the animals, the snakes, the scorpions, the crawfish, whatever, you know. It was all part of that terrain.
Right.
And I felt that that terrain, in a certain sense, belonged to me and said who I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. You were born, though, you were born James W. Brown. By the way, I'm the wife of Kurt Brown, so
Yes,
Brown is there. And you were the eldest of 5 children, and your grandparents, who were stowaways on a ship from Trinidad, had another name. I wonder what that name was.
Well, my maternal grandfather was on a stowaway. Yes.
What was his name?
That has been part of our ongoing process. We don't know, but there's an approximation.
Right, right. So where does Komunyakaa come from? Tell me.
It's part of that approximation, I think. I think it means perhaps compassionate.
And you certainly show that in your work, certainly. You loved going to church and listen to the preacher read from the Bible, right? Do you think, were you thinking at that time maybe of becoming a preacher?
There was a moment it really crossed my mind,
Really? Yeah.
especially when I discovered that James Baldwin, I think probably at 14, had been a preacher as well. So from a great distance, there was a kind of connection.
Right, right. All right. And so the power, you learned about words and their power listening to that, but then slowly you started changing and acquiring your own language and your own desire of.
And I started reading everything.
You started reading everything. From what I've read from your poems, you've been a keen observer all your life, even as a small boy, right? Recognizing the terrain and then preferring to be there at night rather than in full daytime. How did this attraction to the smallest detail, what fascinates you there?
You know, I really believe most poets are great observers. I'm just one of them. The small things, they are elemental to a larger plot in the imagination.
Right.
Because everything's connected.
Right.
It was a place where I wasn't intimidated by the small things. And yet there were moments when I think back, I probably should have been. Especially when it came to spiders and scorpions and small insects and what have you.
So you were laying on your belly looking at them and not fearing them at all, huh?
I did not fear them.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me exactly, how old were you when you left for Vietnam?
I was 22 when I left for Vietnam.
Right, right. And I know that you brought that anthology with you along with your M16.
I didn't bring my M16 with me, but I knew I was going to get an M16
yes,
or M1 or what have you when I arrived there, and that's what happened.
And that's what happened, right? But you spend more time with the book than with the M16, I hope.
No, that was wishful thinking.
I know that's wishful thinking.
I brought the books for a simple reason. I wanted to have what I thought of at that particular time, a distraction that didn't have anything to do with keeping oneself alive.
Right.
In that way, but keeping one's psyche alive in another way. Just being connected to language, metaphor, and what have you.
Right, right. Did you have companions there? Did you have friends there with whom you could share that, or were you absolutely isolated and on your own with that desire to detach from the reality?
I had friends there, but we didn't talk about literature and what have you.
No.
I think we probably discussed the culture of Vietnam.
Yes. Yeah.
The people.
Yeah.
And also, I think there were misconceptions. I had a small column as well called Viet Style. It was about the culture of the Vietnamese people. For some reason, I started reading about the Vietnamese in Vietnam a long time that I entered the military, really.
And so you passed on that knowledge with your companions in arms.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were certain things. There were certain things that I didn't agree with and didn't practice. The mistreatment of those around us, because there was a parallel to that in my own upbringing, my own sense of history.
Exactly. And you saw so vividly that history was repeating itself there. And what could you do but write about it, right?
Take it in and talk with oneself about it in thought and write it down.
Yes. And how well you did that. So many of your poems have been analyzed as perfect examples of what a poem can be or can do. I'm thinking of the poem Facing It, or of the poem Venus Flytraps, or My Father's Love Letters. Those are poems that everybody loves to return to, and most important poems of yours. But I'd like to look at another poem today that is on my top 10 list. And it's ex aequo with the poems I just named, of course. I'm not diminishing those poems. And that poem is a poem I've been teaching, I don't know, for about 20 years now. It's the poem Birds on a Power Line, which has an emotional heft and images that are so memorable to me. For just one example are these lines: I sit here reading Francis Harper at the enamel table where I ate tea cakes as a boy, my head clear of voices brought back. Could you tell us about that table, about your grandmother's home and what she was like? And then I'd like to ask you to read that poem that is so important to me.
Well, my grandmother was also sort of deceptive when it came to language as such. I learned certain words that made me envy the possibility of language. And I listened very closely. And as she cooked, I also learned to cook. She didn't realize that she was also teaching me that as well.
Right.
Okay, Birds on a Power Line. Mama Mary's counting them again. 11 black, a single red one, like a drop of blood against the sky. She's convinced they've been here 2 weeks. They've been there 2 weeks. I bring her another cup of coffee and a fig Newton. I sit here reading Francis Harper at the enamel table, where I ate tea cakes as a boy. My head clear of voices brought back. The green smell of the lowland returns, still in the taste of nitrate. The deep winter eyes of the birds shined in summer light like agate, as if they could love the heart out of any wild thing. I stopped with my finger on a word, listening They're on the power lines, a luminous message trailing a phantom Goodyear blimp. I hear her say, Jesus, I promise you, now he's home safe. I'm ready. My traveling shoes on, my teeth fan. I got on clean underwear.
That is for me such a poignant poem because of the observer and looking the great loneliness and love and tenderness and gratitude and memories. Everything in that poem exists with such subtle tenderness for the moment and for the grandmother. And that enamel table, I'm not sure I ever saw an enamel table. Do you mean, was that a metal table like white?
It's a metal table and it's shiny.
Oh, yes.
You know,
okay.
the surface
Yes.
is sort of hard. Yes.
Right. And cold.
And cold. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And you sat there eating tea cakes and watching her cook.
Yes. Yes. I was taking in everything around me. Something was happening to me and I didn't know what it was. Maybe it was informing me about the future, right, in some kind of abstracted dream.
Right. And then the poem moves on, and then there's that poignant moment where we realize that the grandmother loves you so much that she promised to Jesus, if you bring him back, you can take me, right? And the moment where the speaker hears that and that immense attachment to that moment that you had to write down, right? You could not write that down.
I didn't write it down for a long time until the writing was in action. I could not write it down.
Right.
So there was a kind of delivery.
Right. It happened, you wrote it down before you realized that you were writing it down, right?
Yes, I was writing it before I realized, yes, this is what's happening.
That's why I like that poem so much, I guess. It's been a poem that I taught over and over, and my students remember it too, you know, and the wild winter eyes of those birds. Those are the birds with the white circle around their eyes, right? And your quote, as if they could eat the heart out of anything. Thank you for that poem. I just needed to say that. Tell us about your teacher, Mrs. Green.
Well, she was, as I remember, she wore suits. She was very tall. So she was dynamic in the classroom as well. And she taught American history. She was rather amazing for the simple reason one's eyes are on her, but at the same time, she's delivering the urgency of history.
She opened the doors for you.
She opened the doors.
Yeah. Because your work is, many of your books look at history and are as fascinated, I presume, than you were when you were in Mrs. Green's class. Now you still have that fascination for history, right?
Yes. History, psychology, science, the whole spectrum, I suppose. We could say that, right? That's what makes us human, I believe, as well.
Yeah. And she opened those doors for you. Just one teacher can do that, right?
Yes. So, I had a few teachers who could actually do that. Mrs. A.L. Hannibal. she could do that.
What a name.
Just a name alone, I suppose. But especially when it came to classical literature, memorizing passages from Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. I've come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. As a very young boy, remember passages. The other thing is that we would have to come up and recite those passages tape recorder.
Oh, wow.
Where we could hear other voices come by.
Right.
That was very
huge. Yeah.
It penetrated my psyche.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, teachers everywhere, by the way, for doing what you do. Do you still have teachers, Yusef? Do you have teachers without them being there, but in books or in?
I think so. I think so. They're there. It's a process of discovery. How could they not be there?
Right, right. I remember reading somewhere that you were fascinated for quite a while by Arthur Rimbaud, and that he wrote the poet as a writer is truly only a listener. We listen to what images tell us.
Yeah.
And then you seemed to chime in that interview that I saw, and you said, I want to be able to almost dance to the images that I create, because languages are the first music, and the body is a great amplifier. I feel the poem. You said that. I read it somewhere, unless it was somebody's imagination, but I don't think so.
No, I remember saying that, yes. Thank you.
Could you extrapolate on, I want to be able to almost dance to the images I create, not the sounds, not the cadence, but the images I create. Could you extrapolate?
Well, those images are refined, and they're so much on the page, but also in the voice. It's almost like being part of a larger psychic map.
Yes.
And one becomes enclosed or an inclusion in that map. And let's face it, there's movement. To become part of that movement is really a kind of psychological or psychic movement as well.
There's that cadence, there's that heartbeat, and,
Yes.
and the words and the images offer you that. And it's amazing, isn't it, that some images we just pass next to them and they can be huge and they can be metaphorical and all you want. And then we see one little piece of half a leaf sticking out of a crack of a sidewalk and we start crying, right?
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right. That kind of intensity, that kind of, that's a kind of compression that expands and it breaks things open, including the heart.
Yes, yes. Would you agree with me that in those images, sometimes the huge image, we let it go, but we really recognize ourselves in those minute details? I'm that little leaf trying to have a little life in the huge history of literature, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And I think that as writers, that gratitude and that realization can only bring us the desire to write more and more and more and more, right?
I think it also has to do with the process of making one complete, momentarily at least.
Momentarily at least, yeah.
We move on to the next.
So there's
that we cannot turn away from.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry I interrupted you. So you're saying there's a physicality in the image, but there's also a physicality of language in your poems, right? You sometimes have different vocabularies that you make happen against each other to create their own music. I've noticed that in your work. Am I right or am I wrong?
Well, it depends on how the image arrives,
Right.
if one can trust that.
Mm-hmm.
And time is part of the equation. One feels that, yes, that is the image, but one has to go over it again and again before he realizes that, yes, this is the image that I want to use.
Mm.
Time is part of the equation.
Time is part of the equation. Interesting. And so do you sometimes stop at an image, listen to the image, get the cadence of the image, have all that interaction with the image, and then decide you don't belong in this poem? How do you revise, for example?
One thing I do is that I haven't always done this, but I revise often from the bottom of the poem.
Interesting.
Because I discovered that often one writes past the most important, provocative moment in the poem.
Right.
Is that little door that's left there open for us. And consequently, we have written past it because we want the reader or someone else to understand
Right.
the whole emotional trajectory
Right.
of the poem.
Right. Right.
When in fact, it's more interesting to invite that reader in or that listener in, and they become co-creators of meaning.
Mm.
This is
And
what I
it's,
feel.
yeah, there is a dance, right? To speak of
Yes.
music again, there's a dance between the author, the writer, the poet, and the reader listening and the listener, right? And so that dance is a kind of sometimes beautiful tango of coming and letting go and understanding and traveling together. And that makes a universal poem, I presume, right?
That's how, I think that's why we do what we do.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Right. Right.
Speaking of dancing and music, jazz is a huge, huge inspiration for you. Do you listen to jazz or any music when you write?
I cannot listen to music if it's, if it's vocal. Instrumental music I can listen to and write. If it's in the background,
yeah,
not in the foreground.
I have a question actually that I have researched. I just didn't write that line down, but I understand the terminology blue note that in jazz that you call a blue note, that you reach a blue note. Some of your poems hit that blue note, right? That unexpected moment that you were talking about when you discovered the ending to your poem of the birds on the power line, right? When this takes place in your poems, does it surprise you and anchor the poem, or does it relieve you of having to write more in that poem?
It does liberate you. Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. But early on, I think I was often writing past that moment.
Past the blue note.
Past, yes, that note, the most important.
Yeah, the exquisite.
Moment.
Yeah, yeah, Yeah.
Something that's usually very small.
Yes. And huge.
And at the
So
same
huge.
time, expansive.
Expansive. And it's so expansive that you have to shut up after that, right? That's where the poem ends.
Yeah.
God, I hope I can learn that over and over and over. We all have a tendency, don't we, to want to editorialize and to explain to the reader or the listener, just in case you didn't get what I'm saying, let me just repeat it again. Big mistake, right?
I think it's a learning process.
Yeah.
It was definitely a learning process for me and still is.
Yes, yeah.
Let's face it, probably I still have that tendency sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not a perfected.
No, we still do
place.
that. Yeah. Our insecurity still pushes us to do that, right?
For sure.
If you could be as masterful, but you have to let me say that you're masterful in poetry because I mean it. If you could be as masterful in another art than you are in poetry, what would that art be?
I wish I were a painter at times, but I do have the audacity to believe that I could create sculpture.
Ah, 3 dimensions. Yeah.
And I only have that for simple reason because my father was a carpenter. So I watched him very closely early on. It's just how things are put together.
Mm.
And the fact that how one piece of wood relates to another piece of wood. And the fact that, yeah, it's so, precision is so important to the process.
Right. And to the balance.
Yes.
And to the integrity of what you make. And we can transpose that to poetry, how the planks fit together, how wood suddenly becomes a deck or a chair, or I don't know how to say that in English, une charpente, the
roof.
The things that come together to make a roof.
Oh, yes.
And
yes,
I mean,
I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
It is a sort of art, and well, not a sort. I think it is an art.
I think it's
right?
art too.
So you would be a sculptor in wood, not in bronze, not in marble, but in wood.
I think wood.
Yay! Yeah, for its warmth and its story and what it was before, right?
Yes, for sure.
It was a tree after all.
Right.
Poor tree. Thomas Lux, whose spirit is everywhere here at the festival, had 3 favorite words. His words were bird bath, pajamas, and bug. Do you have favorite words?
It seems like he may have learned those words very early and transported them.
Yes, right? As a child, bird bath.
Yeah.
It could sound to a child, it could sound as a swear word, right? You bird bath, Do you have favorite words or favorite sounds that you use a lot in your poems?
Well, I'll say, for instance, okay, put 3 words together, right?
Yeah.
Good black earth.
There you go. Good black earth. Yeah.
Yes. And I realized that the cadence comes from hearing something such as that very early. As a
child, almost subconsciously.
As a child.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is good black earth.
Right.
Those three stressed,
that's right.
And also deeply human, how we depend on good black earth, don't we? I mean,
we definitely depend on it.
Yeah,
otherwise we probably would be very hungry.
Wouldn't we? Thank God for the good black earth. Okay, bird, bath, bug, and pajamas be damned. Let's go into big good black earth. How important is form in your writing? I'm sort of thinking of the poem you wrote about the towers of 9/11, and you wrote the poem in two narrow columns on the same page, on purpose, right? Purposefully.
Yes.
I see that you write your poems in either narrow columns or irregular stanzas or couplets or tercets, which fills me with joy, right? Because that's all we have. We have the line and we have the form, right? And most of the right side of the page is empty. So we have to do a lot in that other half.
That's right.
How important is it to you? Tell me.
It depends on the poem. The towers, because of the yes and no columns.
Yes.
It had to be, I kept going back and forth about it, but then working, yes. They made perfect sense to me once I had,
Yeah. Right, you had to write it that way,
I
right?
had to.
Yeah. And then right next to it, we have a prose poem, right?
Yes.
And then you turn a few pages and you have a perfectly ordered in stanza poem. So tell us more about your choices. Why? What do you listen to?
I think often it's the topic.
Right. Okay.
The topic. It's how those first lines go down on the page. I used to write everything in longhand, but in January, well, actually on January 7th of 2018,
yes,
I had a stroke, and I have great difficulty writing everything in longhand where I understand, but I'm trying to teach myself to write with my left hand.
Oh, wow.
I'll see if it works.
Yeah, that's a whole process.
Yes.
Are you learning something with that? Is there something that will transpire in your art about somebody becoming left-handed because you were right-handed? I mean, you know, there's the sinister, right? In Latin, it means left, right?
Left hand, right. And yes. I understand that, especially if you're in certain schools, you're going to get reprimanded for it.
Yeah, I got hit for that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because one of the, I may just read this one poem.
Oh, please do.
And I think it's the title poem that okay. Oh gosh, I'm trying to put on 2 pair of glasses.
I do that all the time. Don't worry.
My good hand plays God. My thumb and fingers frame a 0. Then an 8 sleeping on its side. And I say, Leonardo, show me how the miraculous scapula moves like a toned wing, half fused, barely unstuck, and a life dares to lift off. Floating rib, boomerang flat, if it comes back or not. I don't have the stomach for doubt and vivisection, reshaping flesh, muscle, or tone into a portrait or mock-up of a machine, glimpse on the edge of destiny, a daydreaming 500 years early. What if, born out of wedlock, a silky crawl over his face, Leonardo brushed light under skin of oils, science and art. I could stand like man X, moving towards night time, feet parted, ready to do some one-handed magic, singing Judas' old plea. My left hand holds up a sketch, showing a way. Good hand and bad hand, circle, half broken. Let there be a truce, embrace the fall. The whole contraption of gore and math just here as I go over the blueprint, hand raising the brain to higher order, working in the dark, step for step, hovel to temple, and I draw a cross down my chest.
Thank you so much. I'm so much. That whole experience brought that poem to you. Wow. And that man, you know, almost it's so close that it to crucifixion, right? In that wheel. And the fact that you interrogate Leonardo, who was ambidextrous, right? He was completely ambidextrous.
Yes.
He could do that with both hands. Can you imagine what a brain? Thank you for offering that poem. I'm very touched, and I'll be sure to teach that one now. Thank you. To speak about, what is the title of that poem so I can write it down?
It is called My Good Hand Plays God.
My Good Hand Plays God. Okay. Okay. What a title. And the poor bad hand isn't bad.
Right.
Don't you dare say it's a bad hand.
Right, for sure.
Speaking of titles, do you give a title to your poems, or do you just write on the blank page and after a few drafts you add a poem, a title?
Usually, I'm writing the poem before I actually have a title. Sometimes there is a title, but I don't want the title to be overly directive.
Right. Yes. Or a corset. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes. I agree with you. And yet many friends all told me that they tend to just write title, the word title, on top of their poems because they feel they need something there.
Oh.
And then, I've asked this question. Yeah, I've asked this question to about 50 of my friends, poets less or better known, and they all have an answer to that. That title thing, that hat you wear. Some say I don't need it, and some say I write title. A lot of them, by the way, have said that. But that's an interesting thing. In my workshops, I'm often asked, how do you know when a poem is done? And in a video, I saw you give a most brilliant answer to that. And you had a smile on your face as if you were hiding something. And you said, it's a rather intense negotiation. What do you mean by that? Or do you know? Or were you escaping the question?
Well, no, it's a going back and forth.
Right.
it's that dance, going back and forth. And finally, one may come to a place when say, this is it. What one wants to do, this is what I feel, as far as titles go, is that one doesn't want the poem to be enclosed by the title or restricted by the title. Some titles, the poem expands. It becomes an extended possibility. And yes, if it becomes an extended possibility, there is a kind of negotiation.
It is a negotiation, but what a lonely one, right?
Yes.
It's a pretty lonely negotiation with your poem. And also, there is a sadness of letting the poem go, right? When it's done. I have that.
Yes. And then having to move on.
Yes, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. Having been so passionately busy and entranced and hypnotized almost, and in a world of that poem, then suddenly, you have that cruel gesture, which is done.
All right.
And there you are again on your own, right? Not sure what the next poem or if a next poem will be. Do you have that sometimes, that you wonder?
That's an interesting statement you made, if the next poem is going to be. I haven't always had that feeling, but I would say that feeling has grown. I think it's natural.
Yeah.
I think it's natural.
And you are never afraid that that poem that you just wrote is going to be the last good poem you ever wrote?
I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of that.
Interesting.
Because I often use the phrase extended possibility. But what I mean by that is that is the space for serious negotiation.
Yes.
This going back and forth, that's necessary.
Yeah.
I think that makes us even more human.
Right. Talk to me about one of the books or one of the lines or one of the poems that stays with you all the time, not necessarily yours. For example, I have a poem by Bridget Pegin Kelly that comes back to me and comes back to me and comes back to me. When I'm driving or walking the dog, the poem comes back to me. Do you have a few poems or a book that is your companion for life?
Well, there are a few poems out there. One of my favorite poets is Alan Dugan.
Yes.
There are a few people actually talk much about Alan Dugan because he was so straightforward.
Yeah.
And
courageous.
And courageous. Yeah. There are so many poets that I'm drawn to,
Tell us.
There are a lot of young poets doing amazing things as well. So it doesn't have anything to do with age is supposed to equal wisdom. Not necessarily so. So I'm ready. I'm always beckoning. I can go all the way back. You know, the first poem I ever memorized was Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. And it was a long time before I understand really what that poem was about, because first of all, the title, probably I was instructed by the fact that it sounds rather Southern, just the title.
Yeah.
And then I understood quite that the poem actually was about class as well. Or is it highborn kinsman?
Yeah. Highborn
kinsman.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. The cadence and the rhythm and the repetition in that in Annabel Lee is also so important.
Yes, that's right. That's
And
right.
one is then comfortable, one inhabits it because it comes back. It's almost like a heartbeat that's going to come back and reassure you, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And one to internalize that cadence.
Yeah, yeah. We have 4 more minutes. I wish we had 4 more hours. Maybe not you, but I do. A quick question, just to know, actually, a question before the question I'm going to ask, which is on my cards, but are those cassettes, music cassettes behind you in those little, in your book shelf? There's
a little.
Yes.
These are mainly books, but there's a section that those are cassettes.
They still are. You kept your cassettes, right? You kept the cassettes with your mixes that you did?
There are a lot of cassettes that one cannot find. So I've kept those.
But you have them. You have them.
I have them, yes.
Right. If it were possible, on what would you wish to spend less time? What makes you roll your eyes and say, I got to do this again?
Got to do this again. Huh. That's such an interesting question, because I don't know. I don't have moments like that for the most part.
How wonderful. You know what you're saying is that you're a happy man right now, right? I mean, if you don't roll your eyes that you have to vacuum or make your bed or go to committee meetings, for example, or things like that, if that doesn't make you roll your eyes, bravo. That's a wonderful statement that you don't have an answer for me.
I do have a problem of going into the city at the moment.
Yeah.
One reason,
both masks.
One
right?
reason, yes, that is part of it as well, but just being agile, and one has to be, in so many ways.
Yeah. Do you feel that age has made you braver and more understanding or more impatient? You're younger than me.
Age may have made me braver. But also, I realize that I may be impatient not that I want everyone to think as I think, but I do ask myself, I wonder why that person hasn't thought of this. Not that I come out and openly say it, but I'm thinking about it, because life is very complex as well. I like simplicity, but also I respect complexity. The essence of human existence is very complex. So I think it is difficult for the poet to dodge that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also try, maybe less successfully than you, to hold my mouth when I think, why hasn't he thought of this, for heaven's sake? I mean, and then you have to be quiet because we're civilized, aren't we? I mean, I hope we are. What are you working on for the moment?
Well, usually I work on multiple. I used to work on 3 collections of poems, but lately, someone, a friend, talked me into writing what I call text for a comic book, but others insist that it's a graphic novel.
Graphic novel, yeah.
Called Jupiter Invincible.
Jupiter Invincible?
Yes.
A comic novel.
I'm getting ready to write the 2nd chapter. So I'm writing in chapters. Who
will do the drawings?
Oh, there's a great artist, a young artist. Her name is Ashley A. Woods in Chicago.
Wow, okay. And she does the drawings and you do the writing.
Yes.
So does she?
Along with the publisher.
Along with, yeah, right. Exciting. And but you have a publisher already for that?
It was set up for me to do.
I see. Well,
and I was, at first I thought, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then I just found myself doing it. One reason is because I stayed close to poetry.
Poetic language.
I think
concision.
To an extent it is, yeah.
Right. And concision, right? Because it has to hold in a bubble.
Yes.
Exactly.
Concentrated.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yusef,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Thank you so very much.
Your questions are amazing. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. I've been wanting to ask you those questions for more than 20 years. So it feels great that you were so willing to answer them. I'm now going to have to look down at the Q&A and see if there are questions. And there are questions. So may I ask you Q&A? Heather Thompson asks, did your history teacher, Mrs. Green, go beyond written texts? I would imagine the texts of the time would have presented a very slanted view of events.
My teacher prompted all of us to be historically more inclusive. And there's reason for this. But to be responsible as well. We have to be responsible for our points of view. Sometimes our points of view are slanted.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
really?
We don't even know it or even know why.
You're right. Yeah. An anonymous attendee, because that's the name I see above the question, and I'm as surprised as you are right now. Anonymous attendee, hello. You seem at peace with your legacy. What keeps you writing? Is it joy? Is it necessity? Lovely questions.
I would like to think that it's joy.
You're smiling as you say it, so it must be joyful.
Because sometimes one writes a phrase and one laughs about it. Say, where did that come from?
Right, right.
You're surprised.
Yeah. And that's a joy.
And yes, that happens sometimes. But,
right.
Maybe I'm always searching for that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Mary Fitzpatrick asks, has the stroke changed ways that Mr. Komunyakaa thinks or views life or poetry in addition to writing with a different hand?
It hasn't changed that mechanism. That's why I see it as a mechanism, because all the parts of oneself is linked up. I don't think it has. Matter of fact, I'm still challenging myself, and that's what my writing has been about, I think.
And you do that brilliantly, may I add. It also shows in your expression, that's not going to keep you down. You are a master of resiliency, and we all know that. Lenny De La Rocca, who is in my workshop, and he's a very smart guy. Mr. Komunyakaa, do you have an obsession that you tend to write about over and over and over?
Do I have an obsession that I tend to write about? That's an interesting one, because there's always seems to be a question behind the images. Even when that question is not directly posed, the question is there.
Right.
So I think perhaps that may be an obsession with a certain kind of tactic.
Right. I'm thinking, because I'm internalizing this, and I realized that you said something just now that I knew, but I didn't know I knew it. So thank you, Lenny De La Rocca, and thank you, Yusef, for saying that. I have another question, if you don't mind, and then I will let you go, because you've been so generous and so kind, and I've loved this conversation very much. I'll ask you to read one more poem that I teach over and over and over also. But one thing, who or what continues to inspire you to go on going on? What is there, a who, or is there a what? Is there a, okay, probably the word yearning comes to mind.
Yearning.
What do you yearn for?
I yearn to be surprised.
Yeah.
I realize that, yes.
And to yearn to be surprised comes from an insatiable curiosity, right?
The curiosity. It goes all the way back, How can one not be curious about the world?
Yeah.
The things we think we know are more expansive than we realize.
Yeah.
And that maybe prompts a more direct, deeper engagement.
And we're right back at that little boy laying on his belly and
Yeah.
putting his nose against a Scorpio or a snake or a dandelion for that matter, right? It's that curiosity.
A strange quest, but I'm not the only one. I think
Really?
most poets and scientists,
Yes.
that's where they are.
Yeah.
In such an interesting way.
Yusef, thank you so dearly and so much for this conversation. I'm going away a happy girl.
Thank you.
And I hope that after COVID is over, we may meet and I can offer you a glass of wine to thank you for this conversation.
That would be great. Great to see
Thank you, Yusef.
Yes. Take care.
Thank you very, very much.
Yes, take care.